Ja Morant triple doubles are a heck of a lot of fun, and passing the ball and scoring it and shooting over 50% from the floor, that can be quite enjoyable to watch as a fan. But there's a major reason why the Memphis Grizzlies are currently on a winning streak, and it has very little to do with the offensive end of the floor. I'll explain all that and more next here on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How about those Memphis Grizzlies? Am I right? I tell you what, they are on a heater as we speak. 4-game winning streak. 6 of their last 7 have been wins. The most recent victim of the Memphis Grizzlies is the Oklahoma City Thunder, a red-hot second half from Memphis. The Grizzlies, especially in the fourth quarter, just completely destroy the Thunder, 29-15 to close out the game. And Memphis pulls away late, 123-102 in a game that was a bit closer than the final score indicates. It was about a 7-point game entering that fourth quarter. I am Joe Mullinax, your host for this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. You will notice that our wonderfully handsome and brilliant and suave and just all of the good superlatives you can possibly think of someone, DeMichael Cole with the Commercial Appeal, not with us on today's episode, but I hope you'll stick with me. If you're on YouTube, maybe you can just block the screen or something like that, the glare from my big bald head. Maybe you can just leave that alone. If you're listening via podcast, make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing, all those fun things. I have a face that was made for podcasting. If you're on YouTube, just bear with me. Maybe work on something in the background and check every once in a while to see if I've gotten any better looking. It's always possible that has occurred. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. And also remember that we are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network here at Locked On Grizzlies, your team each and every day. And thank you so much for making DeMichael and I a part of your Memphis Grizzlies content experience. It is much appreciated. So, as I mentioned to start the show, a lot of attention is paid to the offensive side of things, right? Scoring the basketball, dunks and passes, assists. The Grizzlies, again, shooting over 50% against the Oklahoma City Thunder certainly helped them win that basketball game. So did the fact that they had 32 assists. That is a massive number, and it's indicative in this Ja Morant, Taylor Jenkins era of Grizzlies victories. Usually when they hit that number, it's very difficult to beat them, and of course that held true on Wednesday night. But the biggest thing that shines through right now for me in terms of why these Grizzlies have won 4 games in a row, 6 of their last 7. And it's not like this schedule has been a piece of cake. They have a top 10 most difficult schedule to start the season to this point. Entering tonight's game, according to Basketball Reference, it was the 9th toughest schedule in the entire NBA. So while things are going to get tougher here in the next couple of weeks, that road trip that lingers certainly stands out. If you look at the Golden State Warriors and the Denver Nuggets, and there are going to be some tough games ahead. But it's not like it's been a bunch of schmucks that the Grizzlies have been beating up on of late either. So how are they doing it? It's not just the offense. And I would argue it's on a smaller scale. It is the offense. It's the defense that has improved drastically, especially since the return of Jaren Jackson Jr. He is making a world of difference for this Grizzlies team. And the Grizzlies defense as a whole is responding quite nicely. I just want to point out that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander of the Oklahoma City Thunder scored 26 points against the Memphis Grizzlies on Wednesday night. But in a remarkable turn of events, 17 of those were scored at the free throw line. He took 19 free throws in that game. And it wasn't all ticky-tack. I think the Grizzlies did get a little bit lazy at times, reaching instead of moving their feet. SGA has gotten really good at creating that contact a la James Harden. But there were some that were exactly like what Harden would try to do in terms of trying to draw that contact in non-basketball ways. The officials helped him at times, giving that superstar treatment to SGA that lots of folks have started to complain about Ja Morant getting from the officials. And 17 of 19 from the charity stripe. That is what SGA was able to do his damage with. But in terms of actually shooting the basketball, his two worst games of this season, and again, as I mentioned on our previous episode of Locked On Grizzlies, he's one of the top 10 players in the National Basketball Association by a variety of metrics at this stage of the season. His two worst games of the season have been against the Memphis Grizzlies. Dillon Brooks created massive issues for SGA during that third quarter in particular, but especially throughout the game. Remarkable how strong Dillon was defensively against him. And again, you've got Jaren Jackson Jr. looming, who has been a major catalyst for this defensive return to prominence, because the Grizzlies, entering the contest against OKC, they were ninth in defensive rating, according to cleaningtheglass.com. And that was not the case. If you remember correctly, if you've been following the show, it's been an issue for the Memphis Grizzlies, the defensive end. And that was an area that DeMichael and I both hoped to see some improvement. And we figured that when all defensive team caliber player in Jaren Jackson Jr. returned to the fold, things would get better. And sure enough, they certainly have. Jaren has helped lead the Renaissance, ninth in points per possession defensively. Like I said a moment ago, you could still see some areas where they need to improve. In terms of effective field goal percentage, teams are still shooting relatively well in terms of Grizzlies being a middling team in that way. They're not creating turnovers at the same rate that they have in the past. Those are all things that were to be expected as the team went through some transitions. And we're not going to bring anybody up. And again, Memphis is having a lot of success, but they're doing it in a different way than they did last year. And that's worth noting. And we said on this show and elsewhere that was going to have to be a focus for this team. And Jaren has led that charge since his return. The free throw rate, how many free throws did the opponent make per 100 field goal percent attempts? That is one of the ways that the Grizzlies have improved. They're sixth in the NBA in that right now per Cleaning the Glass. They were 14th last season. So they are growing in that area. The number's roughly the same as it was. So maybe the rest of the NBA is not doing as well. And it'll probably go down a little bit after SGA's performance that we mentioned a moment ago at the free throw line. But Jaren Jackson Jr. has just been a complete and total defensive force. He was again in this game on Wednesday. Just phenomenal what he's able to do. 5 blocks again. Shout out to former Locked On Grizzlies coach Sean Coleman pointing out that, Jaren Jackson Jr. is right up there with the Gasol brothers already at this stage of his career in terms of amounts of games that had 5 blocks. And again, he's young, right? He's 20 some years old, 22, 23 years old, such a young player still in the NBA, his 5th season, but he was young coming into the league, and he's really starting to find himself as a basketball player. The defensive end is great. He's 7 stocks, 5 blocks, 2 steals. So the numbers that he currently has defensively are only going to improve, again, per Cleaning the Glass. We mentioned this a week or so ago when we were talking about the defensive returns. Jaren's one of the very best blockers in the NBA per percentage. Steal percentage, he's up there among bigs. He's just doing a really remarkable job making life difficult for opponents on the defensive end. And that really shined through against the Thunder. Between Dillon and Jaren, they have a lot of strength as a team. They have a lot of options defensively, different guys they can throw at you, whether it's Santi Aldama in terms of his length and his improvements as a rim protector, whether it's Brandon Clark and his malleability within scheme, the skill that he has, the athletic ability to be able to play on wings, switch, play very well alongside Jaren Jackson Jr. in that way. None of that is an accident, right? This team has been built by Zach Kleiman and company there in Memphis to have these levels of difficulty for teams to game plan against. And defensively, that really shines through. Jaren is the catalyst. So is Dillon on the perimeter. But Santi Aldama, Brandon Clark, John Conchar has issues at times keeping guys in front of him, but he's a very solid help defender. If you watch him in terms of reacting off the ball, being able to retrace his steps, he is a good schematic defender within what Taylor Jenkins is trying to do. Having Zaire Williams back, which we'll talk more about here in the next segment, will only continue to help. Having a 6'8", 6'9" wing, true perimeter player, can only make things more difficult. So lots of different coverages, lots of different looks that Memphis can bring to the table. And that defensive improvement is the main reason why the Memphis Grizzlies are where they are currently in terms of their winning streak and looking as good as they have of late. And that is a credit not just to the coaches and the players, of course, but to the way that the team has been built. They're doing it in a different way, but they are still very much a strong defensive team as they get healthier. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. You add your job, you put the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile, and you spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so that you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. We're here in the home stretch. It's December, a few weeks to the end of 2022. Everybody wants to finish the year strong. The right team member can help you do just that. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number one in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. The defensive side of things is the major reason, in my opinion, why Memphis has been on this hot streak. Another reason that Memphis has been on this hot streak is getting healthy, right? We mentioned Jaren Jackson Jr. at length in terms of his defensive impact. Nice to see Zaire Williams get out there and get some run against the Thunder. And while his shot wasn't falling, right? And I do think that's important to point out. 2 for 7, you would like to see a little more from him scoring the basketball, but it was his first game back. Certainly some rust to knock off, maybe some nerves after being gone for such a long time. Again, this was his first game of the season. It was December 7th. So he had missed a large chunk of the campaign, almost a quarter of it, or roughly a quarter of it. And he looked good in terms of his movement. That was the main thing that I was concerned about, wanting to see how he flowed within the schemes, offensively, defensively, how he ran the floor, how he elevated. And when he did elevate, it was impressive, whether he was trying to finish at the rim, getting a rebound offensively, or whether he was going up on one of the ends of a Ja Morant alley-oop attempt, which that was pretty to see. And again, Zaire has a great rapport with Ja in that way. So the fact that was still very much in play was a promising sign. But just having him out there and seeing him physically do the things that you would hope to see him do, the shot will eventually fall. That is not something to be concerned about in the long term. You would be more concerned if you thought there was a lack of lateral movement, if there was a reason that he didn't jump, if he had a chance to make that alley-oop and he didn't go up for it. Maybe he just reached his arms up and caught the ball. Hesitancy, concern about the strength of the knee. I have none of that after watching that game. That doesn't mean that they won't have rest nights for him, or if there's a back-to-back, maybe they'll try to find a way, 3 games in 4 nights, whatever the case might be in terms of schedule. Maybe they find a rest game for him to try to get his feet under him. But I also don't know that just from watching one game, obviously, and not having my medical license, he looked fluid. He looked good in terms of his physical ability to go to the rim, get the basketball, grab it, and run the floor and do the things that Memphis needs him to do to be a contributing member of this rotation, like we all hoped he would be entering year 2 for him. But another thing that he did well, and I mentioned it a little bit, was rebound. And his rebounding was a great indicator of what makes the Grizzlies strong, not just defensively in terms of staying in front of shooters, blocks and steals and disrupting passing lanes and lines of sight on the rim. Rebounding is extremely important for this Grizzlies team, and they do it by committee, which I'm a big fan of. I've been a supporter of team rebounding concepts for some time now, and the game against the Thunder was a wonderful indicator of Memphis continuing to buy into that strategy themselves. In fairness to Memphis, they've been that way for some time. But in terms of their rebounding, the fact that they are so good at getting their own rebounds, that they are so strong at creating offensive opportunity for themselves, it really is impressive to watch this team prioritize the glass. Zaire getting 6 boards, 8 players on the Grizzlies in this game against the Thunder had at least 3 rebounds. Ja Morant had 13 rebounds. Steven Adams only had 5. He only played 21 minutes. They didn't need him in this one. Santi Aldama had 5 rebounds. You saw guys going and getting the basketball and attacking the rim and doing it as a team. And that is promising. That is a reason for positivity because they need that energy in terms of rebounding to be something that sticks around. Uh, Desmond Bane has had a strong rebounding system. Again, I'm at cleaningtheglass.com. Ja Morant, one of the best rebounding point guards in the NBA. John Conchar, we talked about before in terms of his rebounding acumen. We know about Steven Adams, of course. So continuing to see that be a priority, that is promising, not just defensively, but offensively as well. One of the keys for this Grizzlies team in terms of being a true championship contender is how do they find ways to ensure that they limit possessions for opponents. That's one of the reasons Tyus Jones is still here, being paid $30 million as a pseudo starter backup point guard. He is elite when it comes to assist to turnover ratio. He protects possessions and he facilitates offense at a high level. It's worth the money in that way, especially when the team is fully healthy. Another way to do that is through ensuring that opponents don't get multiple shots at the rim, offensive rebounding, and making sure that you yourself get offensive rebounds, putting yourselves in positions to have the opportunity and the advantage on that end of the floor. And again, going into the game, the Grizzlies were one of the very best in the NBA at getting their own misses, second in the NBA. 33.4% of Grizzlies missed shots were rebounded by the Memphis Grizzlies. That's pretty staggering, okay? And 33.4%, whereas defensively, that number drops all the way down to 25.2%. So they're fifth in the NBA in making sure that they're gathering their own rebounds. So they're not allowing extra possessions in that way on the glass. And it's going to be a team effort. Outside of Steven Adams, you could argue John Conchar, they're not elite individually in terms of cleaning the glass and grabbing the boards, but they can do it as a unit. They have size, they have length, they have the capacity to be able to go and attack and play off in transition on these rebounds. The more and more teams prioritize shooting the three, the more and more opportunity will exist for Memphis Grizzlies player to get out and transition in that way. Steven Adams outlet passes. If Zaire Williams can get his own rebound, we've seen Zaire be prioritized in terms of trying to get out and transition and create offense for himself off the dribble. It's promising, and it's reason to think that Memphis can maintain what they're currently doing, because that is where the key lies for this team. Games like this where they're going to shoot over 50% from the field, that's not going to be consistent for this Grizzlies team. Even when Desmond Bane is healthy, there's going to be nights when Ja doesn't quite have the efficiency. There's going to be nights when Jaren and Dylan don't really have it, where Dylan takes too many shots and he doesn't have the consistency on his perimeter game that you like to see. Defense travels and rebounding travels. That's a credo that I've been saying for a very long time, covering this team all the way back to my Grizzly Bear Blues days when I started writing there in 2013, all the way through being the site manager for 5 years before leaving this past spring. Defense and rebounding, they travel. And the grit and grind Grizzlies, the last era of Grizzlies basketball, understood that and succeeded at that quite well, especially the defensive side of things. Credit to this era that certainly has all the looks of being better than grit and grind, that they are maintaining that defensive focus, that rebounding focus, while having the potential, even if they can't consistently do it, even if there's going to be off nights. There are off nights for everybody in the entire National Basketball Association offensively, times where you just don't have your shot for whatever purpose and reason. When that happens, will you bring the effort and the execution defensively to make sure that your team has a chance to win? And will you ensure that you are creating extra opportunities in those tough spots to get your own squad extra possessions to score and making sure that the opponent doesn't have that same opportunity? That is how the Memphis Grizzlies maintain their current streak and build upon it and become that true number one seed that they have the looks of being able to be. Desmond Bane is still not playing. He's still not playing. Jaren Jackson Jr. missed the start of the season. Zaire Williams just had his first game. Dylan Brooks was out for a period. It's truly impressive to see what this team is doing. And the best part of it is it's stuff that travels that they're getting better at that leads to them being able to keep up this pace of high-level play. Offense will come and go. Defense and rebounding, if you make it a priority, which Memphis does and will continue to do, they're getting better at it. That's why the team's record is improving as well. Thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, I'm going to talk about a couple of players who have taken their games in recent games to the next level, or at least are displaying their desire to do better and not quite be a one-trick pony that maybe they've been seen as in the past. We'll talk about that next year on Locked On Grizzlies. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, and I'm going to start with John Konchar on this one, somebody that I've given a hard time to in the past, but we talked about being excited about the defense getting better, about the rebounding that you saw against the Thunder. I'm excited for John Konchar because there was a time in that Oklahoma City game where the Grizzlies were settling for long-range shots. Oklahoma City was having some success, making runs to get back into the game. And then John Konchar, in two or three possessions, had two of the best offensive plays that I've ever seen him make. And they both involved him getting to the basket and creating off the dribble against a zone look defensively from the Oklahoma City Thunder that, in theory, wasn't supposed to be supportive of that. They were defended attempts by Konchar, and he still converted. One of the critiques of Konchar, not just from me, but from others, is a lot of the efficiency, a lot of the shooting percentage talk that people made over the offseason about why it made sense to move on from a DeAnthony Melton or to try to give Konchar more opportunity. A lot of it was carefully curated, right? To use Keith Parrish, a fast break breakfast terminology, like a craft beer almost. You were careful in terms of how he was getting his opportunities, lots of open looks in sets, which makes total sense. And to the credit of Konchar, he was converting in those looks. That's why he had the numbers that he did. Watching his game grow in terms of being able to create off the dribble. Konchar is not an elite athlete. He's never going to be, and that's not a strength of his game. But he has grown his basketball toolkit enough that he is making himself more of a threat. Teams know that he can shoot, and they have him marked as a shooter on the floor in their defensive sets. It's Konchar being able to create off the dribble, get to the basket in 2 or 3 dribbles, take a couple of steps in terms of Euro step or just however he tries to get there, and he finishes, and he's finishing better than he has in the past. He's not taking enough shots at the rim, unfortunately, going into the game against the Thunder. And again, I just mentioned 2 examples of him doing it well, so hopefully we continue to see that. 51st percentile, he's down about 9 percentage points in terms of his shot attempts that are at the rim. 60% of all of his shots going into the OKC game were threes. Again, carefully curated looks coming off of passes. He's not doing a bunch of dribble, drop step, or step back threes, James Harden-esque. That's not what Konchar is. He's a catch and shoot guy. I'd like to continue to see that growth and that focus. It's nice to see that focus. The Grizzlies development system is remarkable. They deserve all the credit in the world for how these guys are getting better. John Konchar is a great example of that, and I was encouraged to see that layer and level of growth in his game. I hope to continue to see it in future games, continuing on with Friday's game against the Detroit Pistons. Another player that really is standing out in terms of his productivity is Santi Aldama. And the thing that I noticed most about Santi is his three-point shooting. And he was 2 for 4 against the Thunder in this way. But even more than that, what was really impressive about Santi Aldama and his teammates, to their credit, Ja Morant obviously being a major contributor to this, what was really impressive is how they are getting him the basketball, how they are making sure that he doesn't have to bring the ball down. He is keeping it up above his head. That's helping with a quicker release. And that is not necessarily what we've always seen from Santi. That rhythm shot has looked different from time to time. And he looks more comfortable when he's getting it in that pocket. It puts a greater onus on the passer to get it in that place so that he can get the shot off quicker and get it in that rhythm that he's looking to find. But the Grizzlies have guys. Ja Morant, despite takes to the contrary from national media folks or national analysts, Morant makes his teammates better. He's able to get those guys the ball where they want it. And they talk about these players, not just Grizzlies players, but every NBA player. One of the major focuses of preseason work is getting to know your teammates and how they want the basketball, how they like it delivered, where they want it placed. Every player is different in that way. And Santi is one that clearly right above the eyes, right in that range, is where he wants it. So we can get a quick flick of the wrist, not even have to bring the ball down at any point. That really stood out against the Thunder. When Santi made his shots, it was because he was in rhythm. He was getting the ball delivered in that way, and he didn't even have to bring it down. His feet were set. It was good, quick, strong movements from a big man in Santi Aldama, who, again, strong rebounding night, strong scoring night. He's creating off the dribble for himself at times. His game is developing, just like John Conchar's, in a way that maybe perhaps we didn't fully expect to see it. He's looking more and more like the Kyle Anderson replacement every day in terms of being a combo forward who at times can maybe even be a three, depending on matchups, can switch on the perimeter. Not as well as Jaren Jackson Jr., not as well as Brandon Clark, but he's physically capable of doing it. And of course, he has the length to make things difficult at the rim for opponents too, much like Kyle Anderson. So it's looking like the Santi and Conchar being the Melton and Anderson replacements. It's going well at this stage. And again, the Grizzlies making bets on themselves, guys that are homegrown. Kyle Anderson wasn't homegrown. Anthony Melton, although he didn't spend a ton of time in Phoenix, wasn't homegrown. They are choosing to invest in dudes that are a part of their system, that were drafted here, traded here, and it's paying off at this stage. So credit to them. Not to say that the depth wouldn't have been valued, especially the Danny Green conversation that continues to come up on Twitter every once in a while in terms of Melton not being here. That's neither here nor there. I think most folks have moved on from Kyle Anderson, seeing the way that the team is structured. And again, as I've said in the past, Kyle Anderson was essentially a big at the end of his time with the Grizzlies anyway. He was more of a 4 or a 5. And that's kind of how Minnesota's been using him as the season's gone on, and especially with the Karl Anthony Towns injury. But Melton kind of sticks out as a guy that, especially when the team was less healthy, would have been nice to have him around instead of Danny Green. But you don't have David Roddy. You don't have the opportunity to develop these younger guys and get them reps that are necessary for them to be able to produce in the way that they are. So that has been a major standing out point for me in this last Thunder game that we hope to continue to see in terms of these players' developments. Because Conchar and Aldama, even when the team is healthy, Conchar will almost certainly be in the rotation. Aldama, maybe not, depending on if Coach Taylor Jenkins goes with a 9-man or a 10-man rotation once Desmond Bane is back in the fold, and Jake LaRavia as well. But I think most folks understand, Roddy and LaRavia will probably fade a bit as the team gets healthy. And as Zaire comes off of minute restrictions and Jaren's fully back and those sorts of things. I am intrigued by this Grizzlies team. I really am. They're currently 16-9 after the win over the Oklahoma City Thunder. As I mentioned to start the show, 6 of their last 7 have been victories, 4-game winning streak. Desmond Bane has not been a part of very much of any of that. Heading into our next episode, we will have an update, hopefully, on Desmond Bane. I know DeMichael is working on that in terms of his coverage. The team announced that either, after the game against the Thunder or Thursday, there will be an update on Desmond Bane medically. Usually that's not a good thing. There wasn't an update about Zaire and saying, oh, he's going to be back imminently. Doesn't mean that Desmond is for sure out longer than anticipated, but I would not expect anything too staggering other than day-to-day, week-to-week, something along those lines. And remember, Ja Morant was week-to-week when he rolled his ankle, and then he came back a few days later. So there's wiggle room within these designations that the Grizzlies bring. But anyway, on the next episode, obviously we'll be looking ahead to the Pistons game. We'll be talking about Desmond Bane and his injury rehab. And maybe we can take a bit of a look now that Zaire Williams is back, how Zaire fits in with those reserves and how they can best utilize him in terms of the skill set. All things that we can talk about potentially on our next episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. For your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights that only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for making us a part of your Memphis Grizzlies experience. Thank you for subscribing and liking and commenting on YouTube. It is much appreciated. Thank you for rating, reviewing, subscribing, however you get your podcasts. Continue to help us make Locked On Grizzlies better. Continue to help us grow this podcast that DeMichael and I are so passionate about. Thank you, guys. We've had some nice, kind comments in the chat as well as in the comments section of late, and it's appreciated. We are so grateful to be a part of the Locked On Podcast Network and be a part of following this very fun and very interesting team in the Western Conference of the National Basketball Association, the Memphis Grizzlies. Until next time, I'm Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in, Grizzlies fans. This is Locked On Grizzlies.